ignorant billionaire, not in dollars saved, but in heartbeats and days.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.
Greetings and salutations. My name is JJ Weinberg. I'm an artist, an activist, an alchemist, an author, a radio show host, a podcaster, a state delegate. I just actually finished my filing today. I'm throwing my hat into the ring. Not as a major step into politics, but I do a lot of this stuff from the outside, so I thought maybe I'll do stuff from the inside. But I'm all those things, and I'm none of those things. If you find the Buddha on the road, kill him. The sentiment is that if you find the Buddha, it can't be the Buddha. So if you find me in one of my definitions, I got to destroy it. It's a frame. And the frame can do justice for us for a little while to help us in shorthand. That's why I do this introduction at the beginning of the show, to kind of let you know some of the things that I've done and places I've been. But at the same time, it can be a box. It can be a cage. So we always have to be careful. We're a mystery unto ourselves, I always say. But I want to thank, before I go any further, I want to thank Voga, Barnes, and Denny. Actually just sat down with my good friend John Voga yesterday, and, beyond being a supporter for this show, he's been an amazing support for my work. When I need to go to him for advice on things, he's a great man. And I just want to say thanks, John. Give you a special shout out here. All that said, last couple weeks, we talked about ice on this show. The notion of ice, what happens when the heart freezes, when the world freezes, when we freeze. We're in this long winter season. I think Punxsutawney Phil saw his shadow the other day, and that means 6 more weeks of winter. But we talk about ice is water slowed, pattern locked, crystallized into something rigid. And I was saying that we can't smash the ice. We can't just crush the ice and feed the freeze. If we crush the ice, it just becomes jagged and, sharp. We need to stop rewarding the brittle parts of ourselves. The move is to thaw. The move is to flow. The move is love as law. Love is solvent. Love is temperature. Not soft as in weak, soft as in strong enough to change form. Be like water, as Bruce Lee reminds us. Water can crash. Water can crash, and water can erode over time, can erode stone even. And so love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. We've said that before with Rumi. We have to devastate ego. We have to devastate weakness. We have to devastate wrong thinking. When I talked about the prophet Jeremiah before, Jeremiah was a prophet that would correct people. A person who would correct people even when they didn't want to hear it, especially when they didn't want to hear it. And that's what true love is most of the time. It's like not telling people what they want to hear. But so love can devastate even stupidity. Last week I talked about this notion that if I had God's tongue, or if you had God's tongue, basically as an analogy for ultimate truth, and we put it in someone's ear and gave him a wet willy, it wouldn't matter. And that goes to this point that people don't listen. And then the next level of listening is actually hearing. And so I was saying, like the prophet Jeremiah, there's a certain hopelessness that can arise if you feel like reason won't reach people. And so this has been sitting in my mind like a splinter. And it sits there because it explains why so many conversations feel impossible. Why it feels like people don't hear you. They don't let a single molecule of truth enter their bloodstream. Go back to William James. They're merely rearranging their prejudices. And this is kind of a brutal idea in philosophy. I think it's the cleanest version comes from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, anti-Nazi theologian, writing from the shadow of Hitler's Germany. But Bonhoeffer says essentially that stupidity isn't merely a lack of intelligence. It's a force. And, we use the notion stupid. Last thing I'm going to do is want to bully people, right? We talked again last week about the difference between pushing and pulling energy. If you call someone stupid, that's definitely pushing energy, and it's definitely going to make them defensive. But I'm not talking about like an insult, stupidity. I'm talking about something that is, as Bonhoeffer is saying, more than just a lack of intelligence, but a force, an active force, a social force, a possession, like a parasite, this symbiote, a venom. It doesn't just make you wrong, it makes you unreachable. I mean, think about this right now. We haven't really said anything about too much specifically politically here on this episode or socially or religiously, but a lot of us already might have a rejection. We already start feeling that. Oh, where now? How do I have to get defensive? That's that unreachable space. But Bonhoeffer says against stupidity, we are defenseless because reason falls on deaf ears. Facts that contradict a person's prejudice, their prejudgments, they don't have to be believed. And even when the facts are irrefutable, they get pushed aside as incidental. Or now it's like, oh, that's just AI, or that's a false quote, or whatever it might be. Against stupidity, we're defenseless. Not against ignorance, because ignorance, again, can learn. Ignorance can ask. Ignorance can be humble. Ignorance can say, I don't know, and then change. And that brings us to the idea that Socrates said, I know that I know nothing. Essentially, for I was conscious that I knew practically nothing. That space, we think of Socrates as one of the wisest philosophers of the human experience, but yet his Socratic intellectualism, the Socratic method, all of these things kind of derive from ignorance. I know nothing. So that way we can learn. So when we talk about stupidity in this sense, it's something else. It's the refusal to be critically awake or welded into emotional attachment to one's opinion. It's fused with identity. That's why all of these politics, why this social media machine, it runs on this attention. It's fueled by these identity conflicts, fused with tribe, fused to dopamine economy that rewards outrage, mockery, and certainty. It's always rewarding certainty, which is the craziest thing. And I go back to the quote from Mark Twain, the patriot is a person who can holler the loudest without knowing what he's hollering about. This is, of course, attributed to Mark Twain. I always tell people, I give quotes, I try to run them down because I don't want to just put words into someone's mouth or keep a cliche that's been going on for the longest time coming out of a person's mouth that didn't actually say it. But this is one of those that's attributed to Mark Twain, which we also have Twain, talking about fools, never argue with the fool. Onlookers might not be able to tell the difference. or, never argue with the fool. He'll, beat you down and win with experience. So what we're talking about here, though, is not an IQ. It's the posture of the soul. And if you've lived any amount of life, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because arguing with this energy feels like arguing with a wall that throws rocks back at you. Last week, I talked about this quote I've carried around for decades, and I keep it close because it diagnoses this whole mess in one sentence. William James said, "A great many people think they're thinking when they're merely rearranging their prejudices." Put that on. You got to wear that, like that's what I've done with it. With that quote, I'm like, man, I got to make sure I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. And so that's the whole internet on a t-shirt. People, they don't seek truth. They're seeking validation. They're not investigating. They're recruiting. They're not listening. They're loading ammunition, specifically not hearing. And that's where it gets painful, because I'm reflective. And if you're the kind of person who can't unsee contradictions, hypocrisies, absurdities, then you suffer more. Not because you're better than anyone else, just you see more. You see the double standards, the double speak, as Orwell would say. You see the way the crowd rewards noise over depth. You see how the world can hand a microphone to the loudest, confident fool in the room and then call it leadership. So I think of Schopenhauer has a line that cuts right into that. The more distinctly a man knows, the more pain he has, and the more the person gifted with genius is going to suffer most of all. And so it's like we don't have to worship Schopenhauer to recognize the emotional physics of it. The clearer your perception, the heavier the world can feel. And that's definitely not to say it to romanticize mystery. I say it because if you're wired like that, you probably have asked yourself, what's wrong with me? Why am I bothered when other people are fine? Why can they just scroll past it and go to sleep and I can't? That reminds me of my friend Jeremiah that I talked about a couple of weeks ago. The shallow mind can rest comfortably. It can float on the surface of slogans. It's why they say ignorance is bliss. It can drift through life on autopilot. But the reflective mind wrestles with complexity. It sees the cracks. It sees the cost. It sees the human consequences. And that perception's a burden. We look at the notion of doublethink that Orwell gave us, the way power trains people to hold contradictions without feeling the shame of it. He nailed the spirit of that, named the psychic mechanics of it. And we're watching it not just as individual foolishness, it's social machinery. And like we have this scaffolding now with all the social media. And in this sense, once you're looking for identity, this belonging over truth, tribal safety over reality, as people are clinging to a collective story because losing the story feels like losing themselves. So this idea of stupidity as a force spreads. It gives people a cheap sense of certainty. It gives them a uniform, and we've seen where uniforms go. It gives them an enemy. You got to have an enemy. It gives them this holy thrill of being right without doing the hard work of becoming wise. But that famous line, again, never argue with stupid people. They will drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. It's a great line. It's useful. It's mimetic. But there's no like super solid evidence that Twain actually wrote it. And so I'm just always trying to point those kinds of things out. And that's one of the places we love convenient certainty. Like even that, I love the notion that Mark Twain would say that. And so we love a quote that gives us permission to dismiss the other side. We love a sentence that flatters our frustration, and especially if it comes from someone like a hero like Mark Twain. So he didn't actually say those specific words, at least that, I could find. It's obviously in the spirit of Twain, but if we're going to talk about stupidity as a force, then we have to keep ourselves honest always. Because the moment we stop being honest is the moment we stop checking ourselves, and then we become what we're critiquing. So if stupidity is a force, then you don't defeat it by punching it. You're not going to defeat it by becoming a louder version of it. And again, you can't thaw ice with a hammer. You got to thaw it with heat, with patience, love. And that's hard because when you're watching people batter each other online and you're watching the algorithm turn human attention into a blood sport, or I would say reveal human attention as a blood sport. It's tempting to say the algorithm did it, but the algorithm's a mirror. It learns what we click. Don't click it. Don't respond. Don't share. This is just a machine that rewards what we feed. So on the symbiote, on the venom of the parasite, the vampiric parasite of stupidity, it's vampiric on our impulses, our addiction to outrage, our need to feel superior for a few seconds. But that just makes us batteries for the matrix. When we outsource our energy, we are the currency, both the current and the currency as you would feel in an electric, signal, and the currency as in the actual funding for this social machine. And that's why, everything I was talking about last week matters. If you push someone who's on the fence, they're not going to fall into wisdom. They fall into defense to defense. That's how it works. You accuse, they armor up. You shame, they dig in. You attack, they join the tribe harder. The force gets stronger. So the move is pull, invitation, hand extended. You're strategic. You understand the human nervous system, and you understand how fear hijacks the mind, so you've got to reach out your hand. Again, thinking about Jeremiah, I promised myself I won't let his memory become a footnote, and that I won't turn his grief or this grief of mine and the people around us that love Jeremiah into a prop. But Jeremiah, as a 12-year-old boy, if you go back to my episode about Jeremiah here, he was a smart kid. Definitely not stupid. He didn't have that germ. I mean, he taught me what the word ambivert means. I didn't even know it. I was 46 years old. Sit with that. Child taught a grown man a word for a human condition that I'd been exploring my whole life. A word for this tension between introversion and extroversion. A word for living between worlds. He taught me that. And I'm telling you that his kind of awareness can come with pain. Just as the prophet Jeremiah is called a weeping prophet because he felt the hurt of the people. He couldn't pretend that the wound wasn't there. He couldn't numb it out. He couldn't rearrange his prejudices and call it thinking. He carried the weight of that seeing. And that's what I mean when I say the intelligent suffer more. That's what, Schopenhauer and Bonhoeffer might be saying here. They suffer more not because they're special, but just because clarity is heavy. Awareness is a responsibility. If you see it, you can't unsee it. So what do you do with that weight? You can't let it turn into cynicism, and you can't let it turn you into contempt. You can't let it freeze you. So we go back to the crystal. Maybe it can somehow refine us. You let it turn into compassion and boundaries. It turn into a new kind of strength. But, there's, again, the trap is there. The world rewards noise. The reflective person starts to believe that depth is useless. The reflective person starts to believe that if truth doesn't trend, if it's not getting clicks, then truth doesn't matter. It's just a lie. Truth works slower than memes. Love works slower than outrage. Wisdom works slower than propaganda. But slow doesn't mean weak. Slow means it can last. So I just wanted to name this clearly. It's not those people, not a political team, not a demographic. If there's an enemy force that makes human beings unreachable, a force that turns identity into armor, a force that makes people proud of not learning, a force that turns confidence into a substitute for conscience, then that virus is the enemy. That's stupidity. Bonhoeffer says a stupid person becomes dangerous because they're easily irritated and go on the attack. And if that doesn't describe a lot of what we're seeing on the social media, on the streets, I don't know what does. So the question isn't how to win an argument with a fool. The question is, how do I refuse to become a fool? How do I keep my heart warm in a cold world? How do I stay as water? How do I flow? How do I stop feeding the freeze? But if stupidity is a force, so is love. If stupidity spreads socially, then so can courage. If the algorithm is a mirror, then your attention is sacred. And that's, I got to say it again. If the algorithm is a mirror, then your attention is sacred. You have to protect your attention at all costs. And if Jeremiah at 12 years old could teach me something, I just say the future's not doomed. It's just waiting for us to be the kind of people that can listen so that we might hear, so we can hear Jimmy. Okay. I want to tell you something else here. I'm a billionaire. And many of you are billionaires as well. We've talked about the consistency being the crystal, that a crystal is a pattern of molecules. And if we look at it in such a way, we see that the pattern isn't a discipline, but it's a map. And so if we're going to articulate ourselves as any crystalline form, we need to follow the map. That's how we find that structure. And one of the things that you'll hear about in ideas of law of attraction and, thinking, what is it? Fake it till you make it. And James Allen, the great book, is called As a Man Thinketh. And, all of these different notions that things come from thought, and the idea that a future self is calling us to harmony with that future self. But again, we talk here a lot about time being an illusion, Maya. It's all happening in the present. So it's really you feeling and understanding that crystallized self. In quantum mechanics, there's the idea of retrocausality, backward causation, the idea that something about a future condition, in quantum mechanics, it's usually a measurement choice, constrains what can be said about the past. So in that idea of the crystal of the self, it's like, make the measurement choice. That means the past, will catch up to that. And there's also this idea of transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics, where an offer wave goes out it goes forward, and then a confirmation wave comes back, and they form this handshake across time. So, final causation, attractor, magnets, future state that your system settles into, the shape that you're determining from the decision. Again, go back to Viktor Frankl. Human being is a deciding being. Decide. And so when I say I'm a billionaire, I don't want it to be confused with any of that stuff. When I'm telling you I'm a billionaire and I know a number of billionaires, you might think I'm talking crazy or I'm talking Lamborghini, look out at my driveway and there's a Lamborghini, the Lamborghini genie. That's the way I usually mock the kind of law of attraction secret stuff that, again, I'm not trying to be rude, but it's clouds and dirt, it's sweat, it's seed time and harvest. I've got an episode we'll be talking about here in the near future where I really dig deep, the pun intended, I guess, on seed time and harvest. Okay. But right now I'm talking about I'm a billionaire. Actually, 1.5 billion is about where I'm at as a billionaire. And I'm not talking about, oh, I'm faking it till I make it. I've got this vision of the future. I'm literally right now a living, walking, breathing billionaire. And this is, again, where curiosity and ignorance and all of these things bring us into creativity. I was sitting, I think I was at breakfast with my friend Clinton, and I was thinking, man, I wonder, I don't know, wow, this is weird. I've never even heard anybody talk about this thing that I'm thinking in my head right now. I've never heard anyone talk about it, mention it. I definitely don't know where I'm at. So I'm like, what the heck is this? I got to ask this question. And I went to AI. Again, this is a place where AI usually does a pretty good job. It can struggle with nuance and creativity, imagination, wisdom, love, magic. It doesn't do well with those things. Archetypes, even, emotion. It can't taste. Okay. But math specifically, it's going to do a pretty good job at. So I never thought to ask this question in all my life. I'm 47 years old now. And I thought, man, I wonder how many times my heart has beat. Think about that. However old you are, how many times has your heart beat? I was talking to my mom the other day, and we're talking about all these different complex things. We could talk about what we're talking about on this show: stupidity, anger, love, all of the amazing things and the tragic things that we have in the world, our lost friends, our hopes and dreams, our aspirations, all of these things we can talk about. And we're now almost 30 minutes into this episode. How many times has your heart beat in this episode? How many times did you breathe in this episode? Up until this point in the last 30 minutes, right? And I say that because as I was thinking about it and just kind of going down this rabbit hole, this curiosity, I'm thinking, wow, like talking to my mom, we're talking about all these important things. We're talking about life and death, literally talking about my stepdad, Marty's heart. And, he just had open heart surgery. And it's like our heart has never stopped beating since we were born, even a little bit before we were born. Our heart is beating. And I mean, it can stop, but we know what the result of that is. by and large, your heart is beating nonstop. It doesn't get a choice. And there's no break. There's no point when your heart can say, okay, well, we're just going to sit this one out. Need to take a nap. No, even when you're napping, your heart is beating. And when I'm talking to my mom about it, and we can go down all of these places where we know so much, or we feel so much, and we believe so much. And at the basis of our existence is this beating heart that if it stops, if it doesn't do one more beat, it's over. All that stuff that we think we know, that we're going on about, all this emotion that we're carrying on about, just the fragility of it is so profound. If you just sit with that idea, sit and think about it, listen to your heart even right now. And the heart, we talk about the heart, there's the proverbial heart as well. I think I've talked about this on the show. I've definitely thought about it for many, many years now, as a personal trainer and a group fitness instructor. I've talked about this idea that the heart is a muscle, and any muscle unused will atrophy. So that's why we do these cardiovascular strengthening exercises that gets our muscle moving. It keeps it strong. Because if you don't use your muscle, your heart, it will atrophy. Well, there's the proverbial heart as well. It's where our dreams are, where our love is. And if we don't love, if we don't exercise our love, then our heart will atrophy. If we don't exercise our dream, then our heart will atrophy. And it's like we can die of a broken heart emotionally and physically. Talked about the notion of the EMF, the electromagnetic frequency that comes outside of your body. Not like, again, a huge billboard or a huge blaring sign, but there's an energy that comes just a little bit outside of your body from your heart, that electromagnetic pulse that you could read if you had a specific enough instrument to watch it and see it and read it. So our heart here at the center, how do we use our heart against or to bring life to this ice, this coldness, this challenge that we're facing? We got to use our hearts. And so I said, man, how many times has my heart beat in my life? And I was like, wow, I got to ask AI. AI gives me back the answer that based off of just, different kind of resting heart rates, different types of athletic activity, it's going to be an approximate. But somewhere around 1.36 billion beats. That's my heart. So I've got 1.36 billion beats. So I'm a billionaire. I mean, think about this. How many people, if you had 100 beats left, so let's just say your resting heart rate is 60 beats per minute, right? So that's one every second. And you have 60 beats per minute and you're at the end of your life. Or you have someone who's already passed and you just want a couple more minutes with that person. 2 more minutes, 3 more minutes, 4 more minutes. Let's just say you had 2 more minutes at the end of your life to say what you wanted to say to people, to look someone else in the eye and tell them you love them, to share your dream one last time. You had 2 minutes, okay? 2 minutes. So that means you need 120 beats. You need 120 heartbeats for those 2 minutes. How much is a minute worth? How much is a beat worth? Is a beat worth $1? $1 a beat? So that's $120 for the last 2 minutes. Is it worth it? How much would you pay for 2 minutes with someone that you love, that you wish you could have those last 2 minutes to try and articulate something? Or that you wish you had 2 more minutes to say something at the end of your life? Is it worth $120? Is it worth $500, $1,000? So if you map that over your life, if I map that over my 1.36 billion beats, each of my beats being worth at least $1, then that puts me at $1.36 billion. I'm a billionaire. And many of you are billionaires too. Think about that. Again, it's just about where we place value. Again, you just have to remember, you don't beat your heart. You don't tell your lungs to breathe. In some capacity, you're being lived by something that doesn't miss a beat. And this notion of 1.36 billion beats, it destroys the illusion of scarcity. And that makes me think of the Upanishads, where he says, he took abundance from abundance and abundance still remained. Even biblically, I come that they may have life and that they might have it more abundantly. So billionaire in dollars or billionaire in life? Right now, I can tell you I am a billionaire in life. And it, brings me back to that idea that gratitude is a decision, not a feeling. Love is a decision, not a feeling. It's a frequency. It's a state. And it's being in tune with that same force that's beating our actual heart. There's where the abundance is. So I'm a billionaire of beats. And I'm not talking Timbaland, but the beats are worth more than the dollars. The dollars are dead symbols. The beats are life itself. So, the dollar doesn't breathe or circulate oxygen. The dollar doesn't keep me here while I'm asleep. My heart does. The dollar doesn't feed my dream and give me the time to articulate my vision. My heart does. Khalil Gibran says that your heart knows in silence the secrets of the days and the nights. The heart knows. So we've talked about a lot of different things on this episode. I wanted to bring up the heart because I wanted us to get back in tune with the source of it all. But before I close out, I want to talk about a hero. Like I said, we've gone all over the place on this episode, but it's Black History Month. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll have seen some of my artwork, some of my paintings from my Well-Regulated Militia series. I started, I think it was in 2018, specifically the first painting of Frederick Douglass, titled The Climax of All Misnomers. And if you're not following me on Instagram, it's just at JJ Weinberg, WEINBERG, if you're listening. Also, if you miss episodes of this show or you want to go back and reference something, I'm putting all this stuff on my YouTube. There's a playlist on jjweinberg.com/perspective. I'm also going to start hosting on all the other podcasting audio platforms here soon. So the other day, I made a post about David Walker, and that's who I want to talk about here to close out this episode in honor of Black History Month. And I say it on a lot of my posts here, Black history is never a footnote. It's our history. It's a reckoning with our present. And there are figures that have been covered over and buried in American history that should be exalted. They should be at the top level of who we learn and understand this through the lens of what happened in this country. And one of those people is David Walker. And he wrote in 1829, The Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. This is less than 50 years after the American Revolution. While the founding daddies, and we have an episode on here about the founding daddies, the so-called founding fathers, they're still actively being canonized. I have another series that I want to work on in the future called The Patron Saints of the United States. And this notion that we've deified and made a religion around this anachronistic fairy tale of American history. This goes back to the beginning of this episode and some of the others. Jeremiah, the prophet, he loved the people. So sometimes he had to tell them things they didn't want to hear. This goes back to the beginning of this episode when we're talking about if you've got a line that you've drawn in the sand for your identity, what I'm saying right now will start to just create a wall, and then you'll want to attack me. And that's not my intention. I'm asking you to come to this conversation right now with ignorance, not stupidity. If you don't know David Walker and the appeal to the colored citizens of the world, if you don't know David Walker, I'm asking you to come to this next segment here with ignorance, not stupidity. Ignorance, again, being not an insult. I don't know. I don't know about David Walker. Tell me. Let me hear a couple of things. Let me then see how that sits with me when I start to understand it. Stupidity says, I'm not going to listen to anything you say about David Walker because it's woke, because it's, I'm going to anti-learn this thing. So, David Walker, 50 years after the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson isn't some distant historical figure. He was recent memory. I mean, we're talking Jefferson is to David Walker as like George Bush is to me. This is not long ago, or George Prescott Bush even, I don't know, but the gap is not that big, okay? This isn't some person way off in the distant history. And Walker is a self-taught Black man born to an enslaved father, and he understood distinctly what American freedom actually meant because it excluded him by design. And he said so plainly in his book. And he warned that Thomas Jefferson's legacy wasn't just going to fade quietly. I mean, notwithstanding, his actual offspring, his children that, were born of an enslaved mother, his slave Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson raped. Wow. Just think about that. 3 words, and it will send people into a frenzy because that word is so harsh, the word rape. It's terrible. It's almost like, it seems like I'm not even supposed to say it, right? Thomas Jefferson raped. Like, think about that. Think about how that sits in our current culture, how it sits in the zeitgeist and everything surrounding us now. Thomas Jefferson, there's no wonder why that they want this impunity and this exaltation and this whitewashing and this impunity for crimes, because it translates to now. Thomas Jefferson raped. You could say, and it's actually and I'm not just throwing it out there flippantly. There's a case, there's a trial, there's a verdict. Donald Trump raped. Thomas Jefferson raped. So there's an innate and an internal idea that like, oh, I want to absolve this person. It makes sense when you think about it from that perspective. But Walker warns about Thomas Jefferson's legacy. He says, I do not think that Mr. Jefferson will ever be able to erase his name from the minds of blacks. And when he's saying it, he's not speaking in metaphor. He's issuing a historical verdict. America buried Walker's words because they couldn't handle what he was exposing. The nation's moral foundation was already cracked from the moment that it declared itself free. So his book was smuggled, outlawed, treated as sedition because it named slavery and religion and so-called liberty as part of the same lie. I mean, he wrote, you got to understand, David Walker wrote decades before Frederick Douglass published Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass in 1845. And he just confronted the philosophical hypocrisy of the nation unflinchingly, head on, hardcore. And the architects of the nation were still close enough to smell the ink on the Constitution. That's the time frame we're in. This is the first radical black manifesto America tried to erase. And so when we talk about black history, it's not because we're saying, we get 1 month for black history. It's like, no, we need a point of focus to try and unearth, to get into the archaeology, to dig out from these burial ruins of the United States, these actual stories. And so if you see on my Instagram, a lot of what I'm saying here is in the description. Unlike Frederick Douglass, and this is another thing that's worth naming, the representation and absence, and why I'm trying to create this portrait of David Walker for my Well-Regulated Militia series. Unlike Douglass, who is one of the most photographed men of the 19th century, there's not a photograph, there's not a painting, there's really no confirmed visual records of David Walker. This man whose words terrified the nation wasn't granted a likeness worthy of preservation. And his absence isn't accidental. So, I wanted to not accept that erasure. I wanted to confront it. So I've got a portrait that I'm going to be working on as a painting. It's constructed. It's a reconstructed reference, basically, that I created with AI. And I searched what little archive still survives. There's a documented image of Walker's son, Edward G. Walker, and he later would become a prominent lawyer, politician, and civil rights figure in his own right. But using his image, along with some period artifacts, historical context, some deliberate prompts, I worked toward a plausible visual representation of what David Walker might have looked like. So I know a lot of times AI, and we've talked about this here a little bit, is just dismissed outright and rightly criticized when it's abused, but there are moments when it becomes a tool for historical imagination. It was a way for me to restore presence where history refused to preserve it. And so the sketch that's on my Instagram will eventually become a painting, and that painting will stand in for a likeness that should have existed from the beginning. I mean, David Walker helped shape the moral foundation of this country. He deserves his light. if you look at, again, his book, it wasn't necessarily banned nationwide by a single federal law, but it was actively suppressed. It was criminalized. It was treated as contraband across, most of the South, parts of the North. And so in effect, it was banned when and where it mattered most. So Southern states just outlawed its possession. A lot of states like Georgia, Virginia, North Carolina, Louisiana, and others, they passed laws making it illegal to circulate or possess this book. It's like we're so wrapped up in this idea of cancel culture. Cancel culture. Oh, this new thing. No, these are the things that have been canceled historically. The reason we have Black History Month is because Black history was canceled. The reason why we have the idea and the word woke comes from a time frame where it's saying, hey, stay woke. Watch, keep your head on a swivel. Keep your mind sharp. Keep your eyes open so we can watch and see what the movements need to be to get us into full civil rights. And so you've got not only the canceling and the notion of like laws are passed, don't circulate this book. If you're caught with it, caught distributing it, death threats, imprisonment. There was a price on David Walker's head. You ready for this? In Georgia, they issued a $10,000 bounty. This is an enormous sum of money for David Walker's captured, dead or alive. $10,000 bounty. That's about $350,000 in today's money to find David Walker. That alone should tell you how seriously the state treated this book as a threat. And you don't probably know about it. Listen, again, this is the kind of stuff that I've looked at, I've read, I've studied my whole life. I've had an active curiosity for it. From the first time I read Malcolm X, his autobiography, when I was 14 years old, I saw the Spike Lee movie by myself in a theater. I was 14 years old. Even before that, Jackie Robinson, I've talked about this, I'm pretty sure here before. It's influenced my art and my life. My mom gave us these children's books when we were kids. They were the Value series. It was the value of imagination, the value of saving, and the value of courage was the Jackie Robinson story. For me, I have that book in my art studio sitting on a shelf. It inspires me. It reminds me what I'm connected to, where these questions first came from. But all of that considered, the books that I've read, the documentaries I've watched, the films I've watched of wanting to know these things, it wasn't until I think it was probably 2020, 21 that I found out about David Walker's appeal. And I was on the phone with a professor of African American studies, and we were talking about all these different things. He was talking about my work and the well-regulated militia and all the different things we were going over. And I was telling him about certain books, and he was telling me about certain things. And I said, hey, I got to ask you one question before we go. And I said, what's the one? And before I could finish, I didn't even get the word one out. I was like, what's the one? David Walker's appeal. He answered before I even finished the question. He knew that the next words were, what's the one book that I should know that I don't know? Go on Amazon. I think it's like $6 or $7 and get David Walker's appeal and understand the context and the time that it was written and ask yourself why you've never heard of David Walker. In that song I played, probably 6, 7, 8 episodes back, Hypocritical Race Theory. It's a hip hop song that I wrote. Who's David Walker and what was his appeal? Hey, Siri, I'm asking this question. Got to ask that question. And again, ignorance can let us get there. Stupidity, says David Walker, that's woke ideology. That's critical race theory. I'm not listening to that. Well, you didn't listen to it in 1965 or in 1865. It's the same germ. It's the same venom. Ignorance says, wow, I didn't know that. It's like, in that regard, that's weird. I've never thought about that. Ignorance is bliss. I'm like that's the first time ever live here with you that I'm realizing there's another interpretation yet of ignorance is bliss even. Because if I'm saying ignorance is a state of unknowing, of curiosity, curiosity is bliss. It's another way to say curiosity is bliss. Not that I'm stupid, but I don't know. And not knowing can be blissful, not just because we're unaware, but because it can set us up for actual learning. And so the U.S. postal system was weaponizing everything against David Walker's book. Southern officials pressed the federal government to just prevent its delivery. The postmasters would intercept it and destroy copies. If you know anything about my 451 moment, this is something that, ties right into that. The notion of book burning. This is how, this is state-sponsored suppression. You don't have a national statute, but you are using the postmasters to find and burn books, basically. And so Walker died under suspicious circumstances shortly after its publication. He died in 1830, less than a year after it was being circulated. And there's no definitive proof of assassination, but the timings and the threats, enough to terrify definitely future publishers and writers. So again, Douglas is in that milieu. He's in that challenged state, and he would know. So the erasure wasn't by accident. It was by design. And if we look at what's happening, pulling off placards about slave-owning founding daddies, taking down narratives from, museums, what's happening? This is erasure by design. But it's not new. It's from the foundation. And so, unlike Douglas, Walker just never lived long enough to continue publishing, speaking, and shaping his legacy. His work survived, but his name was deliberately buried, excluded from, curriculum, treated as too dangerous to elevate. So David Walker's appeal was criminalized and suppressed as contraband across the South. So that's it for this episode. Next week, I'll probably do some more on Black history. We'll talk about a couple of other things. We'll try and mix the episodes up a little bit just because there's so much to say, so much to talk about. But don't forget, gratitude is a decision. Love is a decision. You are a billionaire. If you're like in your 40s, you're a billionaire. Or if each beat is worth at least $1, maybe $5, your heart matters. You matter.
Ignorant billionaire, not in dollars saved, but in heartbeats and days.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.